Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this CG Pro and Narwhal Studios webinar. So this evening, you're in for a treat, and I am going to introduce all of us in a second, but we have myself, Edd Dawson-Taylor from CG Pro, we have Dallas Drapeau from Narwhal Studios, and Sosebee from Narwhal Studios as well. So I just want to take a quick second just to talk about what we're going to be going through this evening. So let me just share my screen here, and then we'll do some introductions. So just a quick overview. We are going to go through a demo of some world building, some cool world building stuff with Dallas. We're then going to go into a discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit about the industry or possibly industries that involve Unreal Engine technology and world building. This is stretching across multiple industries these days, but we'll be mostly focused on virtual art departments, and then we'll say a little bit about the course that CG Pro and Narwhal have teamed up together to deliver. And we will then go to a Q&A at the end. And whole thing all in, it's been about an hour. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. And let us do some quick introductions here. So I will introduce myself first and I'll pass it over to my friends here to introduce themselves as well. My name's Edd Dawson-Taylor. I'm co-founder of CG Pro, a school focused on teaching virtual production and real-time technologies. I'm an Unreal authorized instructor. I've spent most of my career being a visual effects artist and CG supervisor. Worked on some fun stuff like Lion King and Jungle Book at some places like ILM and Digital Domain. And done a few other things. I've been teaching for quite a while and I now run a school. So that is me. And I would love to welcome Safari. Great to have you on.
Thanks for having us.
You bet.
So I'm Safari Sosebee. My track record is that I am currently Chief Creative Officer at Narwhal, previously at Happy Mushroom. I've supervised on several Mandalorian projects, a few of the Star Wars projects that are from the first season to the latest project. Before that was post-production work in visual effects for like finals, invisible CG type stuff, environments and characters for several years.
Fantastic. Well, great to have you on, Safari. It's a real pleasure to get to talk about this with you. And Dallas,
Yeah, hi.
welcome.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, my name's Dallas. I'm a senior environment artist here at Narwhal Studios. I've been using Unreal Engine for about 12 years now, ever since, way back in the day till now, where it's gone so far and it's taken us so far, and working in virtual production, projects such as the Mandalorian series, Book of Boba Fett, Avatar, and many more pretty much. It's been such an honor to be able to not only work on such great projects, but also be able to bring that information here today to share with you guys.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dallas. Pleasure to have you here. So we're going to get into the demo in 1 second. There is chat, and we're streaming out to a number of different platforms at the moment. Thank you all for joining us. You are very welcome to post questions in the chat as we go. We have a Q&A section, so the bulk of the questions will probably handle in the Q&A section. But if there's something we can bring up as we're going, then we will. So please feel free to post questions as we go. Don't feel like you need to save them to the QA. It's all good. And yeah, Dallas, are you ready to jump into the demo?
Yeah. Let's get into it.
All right. Cool. All right. Let me unshare this screen and then we'll share yours.
Yep.
So there we go.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You want to let everyone know what you're going to be going through?
Yeah. So we're going to be looking at this desert environment that I created, and we're going to be talking about the steps that it took to get here. And not only how did we get here, but how do we get here in the most optimal way? Oftentimes, when you're working and there's sort of time crunches, you have time frames, you can't necessarily spend a week sculpting a rock, so you have to find an optimized way to create that within less time. So there's a few different tips, tricks, techniques, and I hope to get through as much of that as we can here today. So going ahead and just diving right in, one of the first things to focus on when developing any sort of environment, sets, game levels, whatever it might be, when working with an Unreal Engine or other, would be creating first of all, working from a concept. So, for example, we have this one up here. Usually I have my concept art set up in pure ref. So this way, when I select things, it's still there, it doesn't go away. And I'm always looking at it. This is a crucial aspect in developing any sort of environment, as it gives you something to keep going back to. And it sort of takes away that guesswork, right? Where sometimes if you're not looking at an image, you don't have reference, you don't have concept, you're sort of left guessing like, what should this look like? What would this really look like? So having reference is step one, huge, huge, just must have. It also ends up being a time saver. It's interesting as you take the time to either create your own concept or find your own concept. Uh, it's time spent is time earned, pretty much. You end up making up that time in development. So we start here from the actual image of an environment, and from here, you know, it it might be, you might look at this and say, okay, well, where do I get started? Should I start making the cliffs? Should I start making a landscape? What about the textures? What about the materials? First thing to start out with always is let me minimize this real quick. First thing to start out with always is a blockout. And this is quite literally a blockout. It is just blocks, it's just cubes. If I move around here, zoom out, you can see all I have here is a very simple landscape. I didn't go into Gaia World Creator and start making some detailed landscape. I knew that it was going to be a sort of desert path, and I knew it was going to undulate a little bit. So we literally just took a landscape and we just started doing some rough sculpting to it. On top of that, we took these gray blocks and we just created some shapes, some rough shapes. One thing to keep in mind when you're working on a blockout is to not get too bogged down with how perfect it is. Right, the blockout is where you are iterating shapes. You're trying to find silhouettes, compositions. If you're looking at concept, you're trying to match a concept as close as possible. And so that's really the purpose and function of a blockout. And for certain things like, a piece of personal art, something like this, it works, right? We're trying to get, for me, when I was looking at this, I have these little scale models, these little characters over here. And for me, I was just trying to sort of rough in like how big would these cliffs actually be comparatively to a person. Having a scale model in your scene is also another great tip. It make sure that the actual asset scale, texture scale, once you get to that point, things like that are actually the where they need to be. From here, we're working on block out. We start sculpting in the landscape. There's a few different pathways that some people might go. For me, on this particular set, what I did, since I kind of liked my block out, I wanted to stay true to what it was. So what I actually did here is, let me turn this back
And
on.
to add to that, Dallas,
Yes.
actually in the blockout, it's really important to have, when it comes to like feeling out the space, making sure that it's the right scale and you can really move things around easily. So those blocks really help with
Mhm.
not even getting distracted by detail. And so
Yeah.
you don't need to get like any kind of rocks that are perfect for that set. You're literally just looking at the spatial awareness of the space. Does this make sense to have this kind of corridor or that big old block that's over there to the left further down? And production designers or whoever else is going to be the decision makers, the stakeholders who are getting into this, and they can say, oh, that's too big of a thing, or
Mhm.
maybe it's also needing to be vertical walls. You can easily take those really light pieces of geometry and just slap those over
Yeah.
there. Plus, if
Yeah.
you're using VR in this state, it's going to be a lot easier for people to jump in
Mhm.
in a very light scene. And even With this light scene, you can start playing with lighting
Mhm.
and get the directionality. If you're in the virtual art department for filmmaking or TV shows, or even like architecture, you can find out how what the position of the sun should be, what time of day, and even with this very low res blockout, you can still understand what that language is.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, the importance of keeping blockouts and not getting too bogged down with detail becomes really important because yeah, as you start adding detail, one you can start adding too much, and as Safari mentioned, you might get to a point where you're meeting with the production designer, they're looking at it, and they're like, I don't know if I like the scale of this, or I don't like the position of it. Can we move it? And if you have like this thing that made up of like 20 pieces of rocks with foliage and stuff, it's going to be kind of a pain to start grabbing all this and then plus making comments on the details of it. Like, yeah. So, you know, just taking the steps as they should go, just flowing with the process, is just the right natural course with these things. Um, there's a reason for the sort of process of development, and that's because it just works, to put it simply. But yeah, thank you for calling that out. Um, and yeah, so then from here, so once we have the block out, and again, working professionally, once we have the block out and it gets approved, we to start to bring in a bit more detail. Um, I'm gonna turn back on the content SL, which has a lot more detail, but I just want to sort of walk through the process of development on this. The first thing that I did from here is actually took those walls and I made a fairly low res sculpt of these rocks. It's nothing too crazy. I knew that ultimately I was going to be embedding them with other rocks, and so I didn't spend too much time, sculpting too much intricate detail on this. The other reason being is time. It's not always the case that we have a week to sculpt a cliff, so finding quick solutions. So in this example, um, which here actually, um, using this rock over here, let me get rid of this. So using this rock over here. So if we're looking at this, you could spend the time to sculpt this, in ZBrush or whatever your preferred sculpting tool is. However, for me, I didn't, when developing this set, I did it with time in mind and how can I do things quicker and more efficient and still look good. So for this one, for example, what I did I did a very rough sculpt, as we can see here. And then what I did is actually just brought in Megascan Cliff Rocks, the high resolution ones. And as we can see in this time lapse, I kind of scrubbed through it, but I just started grabbing them, selecting pieces, and just sort of pushing them into the rock and using the move tool and moving the pieces around. After that, I did optimize the geometry so there's not a bunch of, cliff faces clipping into itself. Um, but all in all, this process, whereas sculpting this cliff rock might have taken a couple days to sculpt, took me maybe I don't know, maybe like an hour to put together. And again, it served the purpose that it needed to do, and part of that comes with um, the planning of understanding how you're going to use your assets, which can be really important. Again, I knew this asset wasn't going to be its own standalone super high res thing, um, so I knew something like this would be perfectly fine. Um,
And thankfully, Quixel and Megascans,
yeah.
that's part of Unreal now, and you can download those assets and use them
Mhm.
to create these really fast
Yeah.
assets. That it's so important to have that solid round of reference gathering, not just the environment, like the mood and lighting, but the assets, the specific things to create. And when it comes to this kind of stuff, how Dallas was showing, and he's like warping the assets so that it's just this one piece at the corner of this fork, like that can be made a whole bunch of different ways, but maybe that asset is in Megascans at this perfect match to reference, and then all it just needs to be is warped and shaped into this bulbousy corner piece,
Yep.
which for this look dev scene or look dev phase,
Mhm.
it's great for that pass if
Yep.
you can't find anything online that's exactly matching that reference. And then what will happen further down is that asset either gets taken and run through a whole bunch of different sculpting pass, texture pass to make it actually look like real life reference, or maybe there's a real location that a photogrammetry team can go out to scan. With that reference, though, they can find that reference of in real life and actually go scan a rock that's very similar.
Yeah, exactly. And to reference back to Quixel real quick, for this rock, as we can all tell, the canyon is very beigey brown tans, right? And you don't necessarily have to only use assets that are just by default that color. One great useful tip is utilizing the view modes. So, for example, going into unlit, and it's a way in which you can actually balance out various aspects of your scene, such as the colors, the roughness, specular, things like that. And for example, this rock is this Nordic beach rock, and by default, it doesn't look like it goes. As we can see, just real quickly, if we turn back on the tint we gave to it, as well as the controls, we see that just with a few clicks, just a few adjustments, we can take really any kind of asset in a sense and start to really blend it in to, for example, making these beach rocks look like it fits within this canyon landscape. So that's another useful tip trick as well. Um, in addition, yeah, go on.
Oh, with reference gathering too, from the very beginning, it's not.
Yep.
You always want to make sure that it's about the right location that they want to film in, or maybe they are going to film in it. There's a lot of different types of rocks,
Mm.
so there's also these very subtle differences between the different red rocks or beige or something about them that in certain locations they may be more weathered because of water at the base. Maybe it's discolored a certain way, but the Quixel Mega Scan stuff has a huge variety of all these different textures that even with the decals, you can put on top of all these pieces of rock once you have the base color that's pretty that's more uniform, and then you can go into it and actually lay over photographs from even online or Quixel Mega Scans that are a little more representative of kind of like the layers of the sediment of the rock, and so you can have that level of uniqueness instead of patching together different types of rocks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point to make as well. Yeah, and the other thing with one thing I think I wanted to show as well. Let me bring this isolated real quick. So one thing to keep in mind as well is when you are texturing an asset this large, ultimately with this, originally when I was working on it, I was thinking about making it putting a lot more contrast in it. However, I decided to keep it more subtle like this. Uh, but when texturing a nanite asset, where doing it in something like Substance Painter might be a bit cumbersome on the software. So taking in there and doing a custom painter pass, which again takes time, but it just might not on a hardware level, it might not run, right? So there's a few ways around that. And one of the ways in which you can get around that, um, which I'll show right here real quick. And again, this is a layered technique, but the way in which we're building it is quick and efficient, basically. And I'll show you how. So this texture is actually, let me turn off these controls real quick. Turn this off, turn this off. Tint. Temp. Okay. So what this is doing actually is this is a world aligned texture. So as we see, as we scale it, let me get a little closer. The actual texture detail here isn't scaling with it; it's staying the same, which can be really important. Whereas there's times where you might be working on a production, and let's say you put, there's a large pipe in a cave, and it gets bigger, bigger, bigger. They want it to be bigger. They want this size. They want it that size. When you're auditioning textures with it, if you can just nail the texture resolution, like how small the details are, if you can just nail that initially, uh, creating it, making it a world aligned texture will make it that much easier. And just using like masks to drive it will make it that much easier. Because then, as if you scale it to twice the size, you won't have to go back and redo the textures because now the textures are twice the size and it just doesn't work. And so this one, the way in which this one was developed, to show you this graph real quick, and it may or may not look more complicated than it is, but essentially what's going on here is, and for the sake of time and ease, we just took the Megascan stuff because it works. We're familiar with it. It works. You know, don't don't fix it if it's not broken. So we just copied and paste this. This is just for if we don't want to use the layer blend, we just want a tile texture. And that's just really what this is right here. For here, we have what's called a matte layer blend, a 10-layer blend. And we're putting in these functions. And if you can guess what these functions are, it's just the Megascan's material. And it's just plugged into a make material attribute. We have to change the names. That's about it. That's the extent of work that goes into developing this kind of master material, is changing the name so that the layers don't get crossed with each other. And then from there, we made this mask, and this mask is just tiled textures. So again, I didn't take this into Substance Painter. I didn't do custom grunge and all that stuff. I took this canyon texture, turned down the saturation, bumped up the contrast, this splotchy sort of thing for larger breakup, and then this one for more of like directionality. And then from there, all that we did, put it into a world aligned texture so that it doesn't stretch as we extend it. And then all of this is just the scale, and these are just masks for content, for contrast, and the intensity. We have channel masks to split the red, the green, the blue channel, which we just looked at. Green, or that was blue, green, red. So we have 3 of them because we're splitting the channels. And then I had a debug just as I was developing it, so I can like really see what was going on. During initial development of a material, depending, like if it's something like this, I'll create a debug just to double check. And then for that base layer, it's just a simple flat texture. And then through that, you can essentially create breakup and variation within a large nanite asset that might be 1, 2, however many millions, triangles. But yeah, let me revert that back. And how are we doing on time?
Yeah, doing good. Yeah, we did a couple of questions as you came in. I think somebody's answering them in the chat a little bit, but somebody's asking about the detail rock and how that relates to the texture, which I think you've gone through somewhat. Somebody else was asking an interesting question about the landscape itself. Do you ever use height maps based on real data?
Based on real data, yes and no. It kind of, for me, it's a specific use case. When I was first starting to use like Gaia, for example, I was really big on using satellite data. And then I ended up just learning the node system more, and I kind of fell more in love with having more control over building my own thing. If it's something where, there's a project and let's say we're doing a set and the scene it's in Death Valley, let's say, then in that case, then yeah, I would pull in height map data, satellite data, so that we can get the actual geography. When it comes to like my personal work, I tend to just create my own node system within Gaia. I actually in the speed breakdown actually have a section where we're looking at Gaia a little bit. Yeah, and so if I show you here, so I started out with, for any of you who are familiar with Gaia, I tried to do this again pretty simply, and just I started out with a mask. So I knew I just wanted a flat sort of range, and from here, it got a little bit more complicated. Essentially, I'm just duplicating it, combining it, adding a bit of variation. So all these nodes, they're the same, but like just change the seed or intensity a little bit. And I basically just did that 3 times, and then a multifractal, and then got it to a certain height. And I can actually show you the mountain back there. I end up scaling it quite dramatically so we could see it a bit better in the scene. I could show you that breakdown. It's the same. Whoops. It's the same sort of breakdown as that canyon rock we just showed. Come out over here. I'm going to increase my camera speed real quick. So here, for example, I'm going to change the scale back to, I got pretty big, but let me move this. Okay, so I end up cutting it off because it was encroaching on the landscape at this scale. But for texturing it, even though from where we are, we don't really see the textures that much, it's more so silhouette. There's something I still like to do. For this one, I did the same thing that I did with that other material, but I created a simple one. So this one is 10 layer blend simple, and same sort of principle. It's just colors. And then the masks, same sort of thing. And these masks were made in Gaia. So, we have the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. And then all this is just color data. Since it's so far away, we don't need to add really we don't need to add like 8K, 4K textures, stuff like that, because we only really see the color anyway. So yeah, this one I just did it really simply. You could also achieve the same sort of look using like lerps and stuff like that. For the sake of time, again, I just threw it into this matte 10 layer blend because it already has all that set up. But yeah, so I like to use Gaia as often as I can.
Someone's asking a question for finished environment work at this level. What percentage roughly ends up being photogrammetry versus hand-built assets? Is it trending more towards photogrammetry these days?
Depends.
Yeah, the thing with virtual production in general is every project has specific needs and requirements, and so and part of that is photogrammetry, and part of that is what can we photo scan? Is it something that even exists in real life? And if it's not, is production going to build it so that we can photo scan it, or is it just more effective for us to just sculpt it high quality? So it does kind of depend on the project. Some projects do lean more heavy towards photogrammetry, where others are more so relying on the artist to build out the details, sculpt it, texture it, and all that stuff. I will say though, for final texture passes, for example, if I'm working on a project and even something like a wall, let's say, depending on how close it is to camera, one thing I might do, and I've used this technique in the past, is I'll actually bring a wall, basically like a rectangle, right? And I'll bring it into Substance Painter, and I'll use actual photographic textures. So from like textures.com, for example, and I'll find, we'll sort of go over what sort of textures this need to be. We'll get that signed off, and then I'll actually use photographic textures to do texture painting, and project, that the textures onto the wall. So we're still getting photographic quality on the wall, but it's still sculpted, which is kind of a hybrid, I guess. But, yeah.
So Yeah, I think there's some more questions, but I'd love for people to stick around for the Q&A to answer any more on that. Was there anything more you wanted to show, or are you good to start talking about the
very last thing I'll say on this real quick is when you're building your environments, keep in mind always work largest to smallest. You should never be doing foliage right after you finish your block out. And then even when you get down to, so you do block out, then you do the large shapes, then you do smaller shapes. And even with the foliage, when I was painting the foliage, because this is all manually hand painted with the foliage tool, but even foliage, I did the larger shrubs first, and then I did the smaller sort of weeds, and then the grass, and then the little, the little like leaf pieces, like these things right here. So always start larger, and get, because it's always easier to move those larger objects, but it becomes harder once you start putting a bunch of tiny detail on it. But yeah, that would be the last thing I'd say before we move on.
That's a great tip. Start with the big rocks first.
Yes.
That became a metaphor for life in general, which like computer graphics does so often. Yeah, great tip. So yeah, let's pivot now, and if anyone's got some questions, please do ask them again, and we'll bring them up in the Q&A as well. I'm gonna unshare this, and then let's now pivot the conversation to talking about the industry. So let me start this off just by asking you guys a question. You've both been working in virtual production and virtual art departments for a while, and I've been in one or two myself. Can you tell us a little about what is the virtual art department? Because I think that's a question that comes up a lot.
The virtual art department, how I've seen it from my perspective, is that it's this offshoot of this kind of mirrored department that's mirroring the art department. They still use virtual programs, and they're in the virtual space, but what the virtual art department has, what we've been doing is building these sets so that it's visualizing not just the physical set, but it's the extension into the green screen, or in our case, for the past few years, it's been the LED screens, and helping the key creatives review collaboratively, typically in virtual reality, to visualize the physical space and the CG extended space. That whole it typically it has been mostly VFX artists with game industry artists that have known this kind of program, the Unreal Engine, and that kind of that workflow, and that's kind of like the team comp. But that the idea behind how we've been approaching it is that it's this team that helps out the key creatives visualize and explore these sets to get their spatial awareness for the physical set and into the virtual.
And I would also add on to that the virtual art department in many ways sort of bridges the gaps, as well as sometimes fills in the cracks within the pre-production pipeline. And it's great that it is in pre-production, where it's more of the sort of planning stage as opposed to the finished stage where it's all sent to like VFX and all that. It's a way to sort of bridge departments, get these as Safari calls them, I call them key creatives, production designer, director of photography, director, art director, VFX supervisor, so on and so forth. It's a way to sort of get them all together and be able to collaborate, oftentimes instantaneously, in these meetings with each other, where they're able to visualize these sets and collaborate as a team on the spot. And I feel as though it's really allowed for a more streamlined process within production, and I feel like it's helped to allow the visuals and the creative aspects of building these worlds. It's allowed that more time, which ultimately just increases the quality of these sets and productions.
Right. Yeah. A lot of time I catch people talking about how can it save us money, but it's great that you're saying that in addition to the possibility of that it is about empowering the creatives and giving them the tools to be able to make better decisions earlier and help them make cooler worlds and better movies ultimately.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's that creative integrity for like them to make sure that whatever that physical set that they're building is going to continue into that virtual world. Just that having them be part of that is with set decorators connecting with DPs, they can understand what the lighting is when it extends into that virtual world. They're able to like really make sure that that's something that they want in the shot ultimately, instead of it being like a guessing game later on.
Yeah, exactly.
What's it like? What's it like working in a virtual art department on a big, crazy project like The Mandalorian?
It's a lot. There's a lot of things to balance, and I love that it's separate from visual effects in post production. You have the thing that you're working on, and it kind of gets a little slightly boring after a little bit. You have the same sets, or like there's a lot of notes for that one specific angle. In the virtual art department, you're figuring out the entire 360 world. You're working a little bit more broad strokes, and then you get into the details. So it's very much a fast paced. You're getting this stuff from this person. You're connecting with art departments and people that I never connected with at all in visual effects, post production, DP, production designer, which I'm embarrassed to say that I never really understood that role and the roles underneath. And being part of the virtual art department, it became so clear on what everyone was doing, and I found so much respect for everybody that was involved with even just greens department. They have to figure out all the different plants. Like my knowledge went up tenfold, and it was such I love that experience of being on set and seeing how this is actually built. It's a lot more chaotic than I was picturing in visual effects, and I was wondering why certain things were happening, but I understand it now. I absolutely loved it.
Very very connecting is what I'm hearing. Very
Mm-hmm.
learning about lots of other things other than just the computer graphics. You're learning about the filmmaking. You're meeting all these other people and departments. It's a very collaborative and
I'm not in a box. Yeah, it's like I'm not in this little cubicle of making amazing stuff, by the way. And it takes a lot of work in the visual effects side. But man, I was really disconnected from the whole filmmaking process, not doing a lot of research on my end immediately, obviously. But then it being in that like space, I was absorbing a lot of this information just being by proxy to it.
Yeah, and it's kind of surreal sometimes, especially when you like first get into doing it. It's like, for example, work on something like Star Wars for the first time, especially if you're like a longtime Star Wars fan. Like I'm sure most people listening are, including me. I'm a huge Star Wars nerd.
Star Wars.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and so it's like you're like, hey, you're going to be on this show. It's a Star Wars show, and you get to actually be there. And I remember like first day on like Book of Boba Fett, and we're sitting there and we're just looking at concept art with the production designer. And I remember like this is like it was like a surreal feeling in a sense, uh and then they're like, yeah, I think first thing we want you to do is like make a Sarlacc pit. And I was like, a Sarlacc pit? Oh man, I'm in heaven, and so you have like that kind of stuff. And then another project, which I probably shouldn't name, but I was on a project where I got to do a lot of the lighting for it. And it was so cool. It was a project that I was so excited about also. And it's kind of, again, surreal um, to think about how collaborative it is, because you're in a meeting. I was in a meeting with the director of photography, And here he is asking what I think, so it's not just like, hey, move the slide here, do this, do this, do that. It's we're sitting there setting up lights and everything, and he'd be like, hey, do you think we can what do you think about putting a little bit of light just scraping the top of this roof? And I was like, yeah, okay. I put it there, and he's like, what do you think? I was like, I think it looks good. What do you think if we do this? And all of a sudden, it's like, here I am, an environment artist in Unreal Engine. Like, I'm not a director of photography, I'm not a director or production designer, but here I am, an artist, and I'm getting to have this like fully collaborative experience with the director of photography on this massive project, and to be able to bounce ideas back and forth. What do you think about this shot in 27? What do you think about it in 42 millimeter? Like, and yeah, it's such a cool experience, and being able to work within Unreal Engine, create environments, work with great teams, great people. It's just really, it's really cool. It's
Making it sound like fun, Dallas.
it's a lot of fun. I get really excited. Yeah, just I get really excited about what I do.
What about you, Ed?
Yeah. I'm excited too. I've very much enjoyed working in virtual production from Jungle Book, where it was kind of being figured out a little bit. I mean, it was building on top of things from Avatar and things from Lord of the Rings, but yeah, moving through some of those experiences, and exactly the things that you guys are saying. And I'd been this visual effects artist for most of my career in a dark warehouse, often by myself with headphones on, and suddenly all of a sudden here you are mixing with these people and learning the whole other side of the craft. Usually in visual effects you end up with a shot at the end of its life, and it was thrilling to be able to help inform what the shot was going to look like from the I worked in previs a little bit before, which this kind of emerges from. In fact, this little slide here I've got that illustrates some of the things that use these tools and techniques from the previs days of what kind of led towards virtual production, and borrowed from some other things that have existed already, motion capture, and none of this stuff being entirely real. We've had LED screens, we've had mocap, we've had real-time engines in the past. They've all kind of matured at the right moment and allowed us to be able to do this in various different forms, not just the LED, but there's also green and purely virtual, like it was on The Lion King, and all the different flavors of it. I think it's tremendous. I love it. I really I've seen, as you guys said, how it benefits the filmmakers, how they can be freed up to not have to lock in a shot in a story cell and then have to live with it all the way through post. Now
they can live with that for a second and then go back in to explore it. It's to have that there's some containment to it, but a freedom to like explore these things and move massive parts of the set, but still have that fidelity. Even years ago, Unreal 4, being able to bake with the CPU, it's still like a really great representation of a set, what it could look like with all the bells and whistles later on. But I love the idea of more green screen shoots using this, like am I saying this right? Simulcam and Anycam, using that so that they're still doing the same visualization and figuring out what the look of it is, but then they can frame up on it whenever they can do a live comp, not even have to worry about LED screens. It's still like this thing that can be used all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to see it because of the relative affordability in many cases of green or blue screen, being able to be used by independent film creators, and even there's some LED volumes that are popping up that are in the 5,000 to 10,000 a day range, which is like, people aren't really broadcasting that very much, but this is now starting to become accessible to independent filmmakers, which I think is going to make it get really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen a couple on TikTok that they've been doing some really creative stuff on how to use that. Just even like a flat wall that's a big square, and the way that they have camera moves and the sets they're using, and like the transitions. It's really well done. Like people are getting really creative for how to shoot this kind of stuff.
Somebody's asked a really interesting question in here, talking about the industry. Somebody says, what skills and techniques do you look for when reviewing portfolios for mid and senior level roles versus early career roles? How do showreels work with this stuff?
You have to. I like looking for. It depends, I guess, on the project too. For me and what the projects we've been working on, which is more photorealism, it's very much a showing that it's the environment, even characters too. That there's a attention to scale and lighting, which lighting is mostly unfortunately you have to kind of also be good at photography and kind of position a camera, because I do look for composition and framing, especially with senior roles, because I want to be able to, with these kind of projects, hand off a set to someone and say, here's the general reference, here's the one liner from the script, this is the feeling that we're wanting to get before we show a DP. We're going to show the production designer. And so you have about a week to go through a couple iterations of a block out. And then we'll get into like look dev and lighting the next week. But then like also can take the feedback that's still abstract. There's a point where the senior and the supervisor can riff and kind of like talk about it, but even the supervisor is going to get notes and they may not be clear. And so it's like that level of problem solving and kind of going back and forth with what do they mean by this? And is there another way we can present this? They say that they want a brighter sunlight or something like that. They're saying these things, but they mean this. So it's that translation of what's being said versus what they're trying to get, which is really hard to measure. But in a reel, very much like the quality of the texture, definitely the scale of like the props and the position, the set dressing. Set dressing is huge because it's very tough to really get that perfect without someone who it's been a while since I've dressed a scene, but even being with the set dresser on these projects, she takes me to school every single time. She's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I thought that was good. And then on top of that, the lighting, the mood, and kind of like what you're pointing the camera to. Why is that important? And how is it that you're weighing this angle versus that angle?
Yeah, I would, on top of what Safari is saying, which are all great points and exactly something to look at when you're looking at your own work. I'd piggyback off that and also sort of add and elaborate a bit on one thing that is great to learn is learn how the eye likes to look at an image. So, which falls under like composition and set dressing, things like that. So, for example, your eyes like to take the path of least resistance as it's looking at an image. And so, and this is specifically a note for composition, when you're creating a composition, if it's just like chaos all over the place, even if it's a beautiful render, with the lighting quality and all that stuff, it's still gonna like hurt your eyes to look if it's just chaos. And there's easy ways to do, like for example, that desert path. It's one of the easiest things to do is put a path in it. If you're doing a forest, put a path, make it do a little S. Your eye likes to do little S's up the screen. That's just one little tip. Additionally, would be the more senior level you become, I would say being able to, so I guess as Safari was saying, like read the subtext in a sense. They say brighter, but are we talking about surface of the sun bright or like 2 decibels bright? Like, what do we mean? So being able to sort of interpret that based on, it could be based on the relationship maybe you've already spent time with the DP, so you kind of know what he's thinking. So you're like, okay, he just probably means this. Could be based on past feedback. Could be based on concepts and references. It's oftentimes that we'll, speaking about lighting, it's oftentimes that we'll compile lighting reference, and so that's something to fall back on if you're unsure, is to look back and say, okay, they're kind of going for this. So how do I get it closer to that? And as a senior environment artist, being able to actually execute that. And then as well as sometimes, it's sometimes the case when work on these projects, just like any other sort of industry, I guess, but it might be like, hey, we need this change and we need it tomorrow. And these are all the notes. And it's like, okay. So it's like, as senior artists, it's like having the ability to sort of break that down, compartmentalize, like, okay, we need to do this first, this first, this first, this first. And this is how we get it done in a timely manner. It's, again, one of the reasons for showing this desert environment was showing how to do things quickly. Because these are some of the techniques that you may or may not have to use depending on your time frame. Like if I had to sculpt that rock and I had to have it in tomorrow, I can't spend 2 weeks in ZBrush. I have to throw something together. So, but yeah. So, as far as entry level, I don't know. So, Safari, do you have comments about what you'd be looking for if someone's just looking to get in as like a junior artist or anything?
Yeah, with the amount of work that I would often assign to associates is that associate artists, it's the asset work, and then assuming I'm not entirely sure the quality of work that they have, but it's kind of our introductory thing of here are the assets and kind of starting with that, and here's tons of assets to go through in the VAD. And it's really quick iteration, kind of getting them used to that. And so if I see it's something that's, they're concentrating on the things that make something look good, the way that they construct an asset, it's more important than a whole scene. But if they can construct a whole scene, then awesome. It's just that sometimes it's so much, it's a lot to bite off. More than there's a phrase that's that more than you can chew.
Bite off more than you can chew.
That's it. And so the idea is that it's, instead of having to like have a few environments that are just low quality, but you hit everything, focus on one environment that you concentrate on a lot, and you have like those couple assets that are really shining. And those are a little complicated, like using booleans and remeshing certain complex shapes. That isn't just a lamp that is a simple shape that has a texture on it, although it could be a really complicated looking lamp that's that shape. Like the texturing could be a little bit pushed, or like the fraying of the lamp shade, there's holes in it and there's like a little bit of whatever the threads are. And so that level of attention to certain things, that's what I would look for like associates.
And the last thing I'll say on this, which is more of a general note for just everyone, and as far as portfolios go, and I know Ed and I were talking about this, is one thing that'd be great is if you can create an environment, but then also sort of show how you got there, and maybe even show the concept of reference. Because someone might look at your scene and say, that's a beautiful environment, they did really good. And then on the other hand, they might say, what was it supposed to look like? And which can be really important. Basically, the point being made is emulate the industry you're trying to get into. So virtual production, for example, we usually work from concept art, and we follow a process. We go from block out to look dev and so on and so forth. And so if you really want to get into virtual production and you really want to sort of shine, um, create a really good, even if it's just one really stellar portfolio piece, but then show a piece of concept art, show the block out, the look dev scene, show the unlit, the color balance, show the process of how you got there. That way, when a potential employer is looking at your work, it's not just, oh, I'm looking at a pretty image. They're looking and they're like, okay, this person understands how to break down a piece of concept art. They know how to make a block out. They know how to make assets. They know how to light. They know how to do this. Why wouldn't we want them? Right.
Right.
And it's like that old saying, like never give a person a reason to say no. And that's basically what you do when you do that.
I always describe it as risk management. That's what you think of. The person who's looking at your show reel is risk managing, and if you can eliminate as many of the risks as possible,
That's great.
then you get the gig.
Yep.
Because they don't like risk.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, we can hopefully do a little more QA. I just want to take a second here just to talk about the course that we're building together and give people an opportunity to also ask about that. So I did have another diagram here, which is enormous. It probably would take several hours to talk all the way through, but this is attempting, and I'm happy to share this with anybody, how a production company starts a project, starts employing all these people, visual effects supervisors and art departments, and how they start to come together into what we end up with at the end here, which is a full crew of people with a brain bar or a stage volume control or whatever it's called these days. There's more like types of work here than there are job titles, but running a little low on time to go through this in detail. But I wanted to at least show how we have this sense here of the virtual art department, where it's very tightly bound to the art department, ideally the same thing, really, with a bunch of folks, a supervisor, people building sets, doing layout, making assets, and then in the brain bar or the volume control, having people wrangling scenes and making sure that they get on set and making sure that all of the pieces fit together. And a lot of this it can get very complex and it can be very simple. This whole bit at the bottom here could just be one person on some stages, but it could be 50 people in a really complex environment. So not maybe we can come back to this in the Q&A, but I did want to just take a moment here just to talk about how we are building a course together. Narwhal Studios and CG Pro have come together to create a world building course, and I'm very excited to talk about this and ask if anybody has questions about it. So CG Pro, we're a school. We've been around for about 2.5 years. We focus on virtual production. We were the first people in the world to partner with Epic Games and teach their Connectors program. We've been doing that many times since, and we've also expanded into having several other classes. This is one of them, our world building course with Narwhal Studios. And we're a very active community, and we focus on very high standards. And it's a great pleasure to come together with such a cool organization as Narwhal to bring both of our experience together and our sets of standards and our people to be able to offer this class. So some of the people that you see in front of you right now will be involved in the course, myself and Dallas as instructors, and Safari will also be joining us as a guest. It's world building in Unreal Engine 5.1. We'll see when 5.2 turns into production, but intending on it being 5.1. What this is, anyone who's done a course with CG Pro before will be very familiar with the format. It is the same format that we usually run. So it is 8 weeks long. It has a certificate at the end of it, which is backed by us. and Narwhal and Epic in terms of being an authorized training center. It's all live taught. We teach everything live. It includes live training sessions, live mentoring, live lab, and a forum in the background to help you with your questions outside of a live session. We meet twice a week for live sessions, one for the main training session, and then one small lab, and then one other lab during the week. We start on April the 30th. For anyone previously seeing it was the 23rd, we have pushed it back by a week just to let anybody who's already signed up know that. But just to make it even better, we're beginning on April the 30th. It's project based, so you get to build a super cool world in 8 weeks. More than one if you're adventurous, but no, we're at least going to get you one super cool world for, as we were just describing, for your show reel, and we'll teach you how to do that and what to include in it, how to build a great reel, how to build a great world, and go work in the virtual art department if that's what you choose to do. You get all the recordings. They are with you forever. You get access to these cool guys, Dallas, Safari, and our other amazing instructors and industry guests. Also access to this great community, the community of CG Pro and Narwhal. We're a thriving community, and you get access to that even after the class. The price of this course is $3,997. We do have a couple of payment plans, so ask us about that if you're interested. And we do have a few spaces left, not many because this has been kind of a popular one. But if you're interested, then we will, I think, yes, there go all the links in the chat. So feel free to click on those, go find some more information. There's places to sign up. If you have any questions about it, stick around for the QA and we will go through them in addition to any other questions which we haven't got through already. Is there anything else? I think that was the last slide on that. Anything else from you guys that I missed or that you would want to highlight about this great course?
I mean, I'm just looking forward to being a part of this and helping people embark on their journey in virtual production. You know, it being it's still considered like a new space, right? And we have studios popping up all over the place. So there's just so much opportunity out there right now in virtual production. You know, it's still a brave new world. You know, it's the next frontier in filmmaking, pretty much. And to get in it even now is still getting into virtual production sort of ahead of it, which just only helps everyone getting involved with it pretty much. So yeah, I look forward to being a part of your journey if you're going to be joining us and helping you build some awesome sets.
I'm excited too.
Yep.
Yeah, and as you said, a great moment in time. It hasn't all been figured out yet. Visual effects definitely felt like a lot of the big problems had been figured out. There's still a lot of innovation thanks to AI now jumping in and stirring things up. But yeah, virtual production is at the beginning of its life. It's tremendous fun. It's a way to really blow the doors open and mix with all of those other creative folks from the film industry, which we haven't had a chance to do much before. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Looking forward to teaching again as well.
Yep.
Cool bananas. Well, then without further ado, we can take some more questions as long as you guys have a few more minutes to stay on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. So let me go back here and see what we got. All right. Did that one. We did that one. And we did that one too. How will the course be broken down? Is there in-class experimenting with students, or is it lecture plus guest speakers and demos? I'll take a crack at that one, and then guys feel free as well. The course there's twice a week that we meet live. One at the weekend where we have an instructional session that's going to be watching the instructor. Still opportunity to ask questions. We have a live lab at the end, just in case there's any longer answers that we need to give. But it's very interactive. The midweek lab is really designed to, you bring your project, we give you constructive feedback about it and how to improve it. And based on us having been in the industry and whatever your goals are, for some, I know that they're going to be wanting to get into the industry and we can help with that. Some people, they just want to make cool stuff for their own projects, and that's cool as well. Maybe people making their own films, or there's a whole new generation of content creators being born out there that are now have access to visual effects and not just the camera experience that we went from people getting access to cheaper cameras and being able to make their own films. Now people can make their own visual effects films, which is super cool. But yeah, plenty of access to all the instructors, guests. There's going to be lots of instruction and demos and guest speakers and mentoring, but there will be lots of experimenting in class for sure. That's what all this is about, really, is about experimenting on an idea and iterating through it really quickly. That's the whole ethos of virtual production, really. So yeah. Anything else to add?
Getting that, we have this this perspective of being on these projects and making it so that it's making these sets based off of what these filmmakers, Greg Fraser and Favreau and Andrew Jones, Ant-Man was dang, I forget his name. The guys from Ant-Man, like the crew from Ant-Man. And it's just about like us trying to, it's not just putting these sets together in just like a beautiful way, which is the aim. It's like imparting a bit of the knowledge that we've all had from being in the virtual art department and being close to these people who have this more specifically filmmakers perspective on how to build these environments and get these cameras. And so it's about like is kind of working through how to think in that way in these labs, and kind of like see what kind of camera angles and kind of animation and environments that can be created based off of that kind of knowledge.
Yeah, it essentially, I mean, you could almost sum it up as like turning game artists into filmmakers, because virtual production really is, you're working with filmmakers. And so you, in your own right, become a filmmaker. I mean, when you're working with Jon Favreau and Greg Fraser and like all, we could throw out a million names, but, the education even you get from that, like when you're working with someone like Andrew Jones, for those of you that might not know, he's a production designer on The Mandalorian, phenomenal guy to work with, really knows his stuff. But when you work with someone like that, like you learn so much as an artist of like how to build your sets. But on top of that, like what's the standard that like Hollywood is going to expect from me, right? So if I'm going to work on Star Wars, what's the quality bar, right? What are things that I need to know? And for people like you out there that might specifically want to work on Star Wars, it's like, if you want to know, like, well, what exactly do they look for? It's like those are sets that we have extensive knowledge building, and that's kind of the way in which we, that's kind of the standard we use when we build our environments.
And yeah, some would add to that also some of the soft skills that don't get talking about quite as much, like how do you behave, like how do you operate when you're in the middle of all of that madness, and how do you show up? Because if you want to go play in the big leagues, you've got to show up in the way that they expect, and that's not necessarily something that's always taught in schools, but something which we talk about.
Go on, Safari.
That's unless you are in that position, I never understood it. And as soon as I was thrown into that fire, I was like, oh, I have to adapt pretty quickly. But here, after several months, I think I got pretty good at it, where it's just like, okay, now I can figure out what this person's actually talking about, where I expect that he's going to ask for these things. I'm going to prep my scene like this. And even in doing that, even Dallas has gone through this, where it's just like the DP is going to ask for this kind of thing. They talked about lighting in this certain way, and they know, or he knows, that it's going to be that DP has a specific style, whether the exterior is going to be a certain kind of sky, and so it's going to be this kind of mood. He knows to kind of prep those, but why is he? It's a little bit of style, but there's a reasoning behind their styles, where it's like, what are they trying to what are they trying to get with this line of thinking, and this experience of working with these people is even Favreau, where he has the story of, there's a Super Bowl trailer, a trailer made for the Super Bowl when Iron Man came out, where it's a certain shot where Iron Man he's in the Middle East and he's fighting against these people, and it's the tank shot that gets blown up. He deflects a missile and the tank blows up. So in this initial version, it was very, very CG, even though a lot of the assets were real, and their photogrammetry and all the stuff was photographs, and the sky was photographed, 360 photograph, but it was just looking so fake. So what they ended up doing was that you can have that level of realism, but if you're not building that world, with the thought behind it, where you're going on location, and you have the ugliness of the real world lighting, and you have the limitations of what you have in that real world space, knowing that kind of limitation is going to add to that world building, which I saw someone comment on getting a cheap camera, or any kind of camera. Really, your phone can kind of take care of it, even though there's not a lot of there's no proper depth, but you can practice with seeing what that language looks like, even by taking photographs and taking note of, like, oh, the sky blows out when you're exposed in this way. And those are the kind of tidbits that really come through when these people who are around this, like the physicality of filming, they impart, and they have this like line of anecdotes to pass off, and that's things that I've never really thought about before working with these people.
Yep. Oh wait, Ed, I think you're muted.
Thank you.
Oh.
Good info coming through here. Thank you. Then we got a bunch of questions, so let's try and get through a few more. Somebody saying that they were introduced to ICV effects while a game art student at Full Sail. Really want to get into the industry and work my way up to an environment artist. Do we have to model our own assets? Good question. That comes up a lot.
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. You should know how to model an asset. Like, it's something that you should be prepared for, whether you end up doing it or not. You know, you might hop on a project and you might end up only doing textures or something like that, for example. But being able to model is really going to help, because even if you have a dedicated modeler, for example, on a project, which you don't always have a dedicated person doing all the modeling, but even if you do have that, let's say, there might come a point in time, you're on a project for like 8 months, and they might get sick, or they're like, hey, I'm going on vacation with my family for a week. Who's doing the modeling now? So you don't have to be a master at modeling, right? But you should know how to model. You should know a little bit of sculpting and things like that.
Because there are specialists that do lighting extremely well, or set dressing extremely well. But ideally, there's some secondary and tertiary knowledge on how these environments can be created, so that it's not sometimes is the workload. If there's a lighter specialist and there's not a lot of lighting work for 2 weeks for some reason, I'll want them to kind of push along certain assets and model something or texture something. So yeah, it's always great to have that knowledge.
I would say be a generalist if you as
Yeah.
much as possible. The more can't be the world class at every single discipline, but I had it plenty of times with leading teams too, where people were not able to jump from one thing to another. It's a bit frustrating if they just sat doing nothing whilst they could be doing a bunch of the other work that's come up. So yeah, it's good. And there's an update to the question in real time. Person's asking really meant for the course. So I guess they're asking, like, do they have to make their own assets as a part of the class? Which is a simpler question and somewhat.
Yeah.
No, you don't have to for the class.
No. Yeah, we want to make sure that the course sort of fits people of all levels within the vocation, whether you're entry level, you're not, you're trying to get into it, but you've just barely started, or if you're, been a seasoned veteran in the industry and you want to learn something new, we sort of design it to fit everyone. So if you want to do some modeling for your project, we're not going to stop you. If you want to do it, then then push your environments with the modeling. But there's also various other resources to use when building your environments, which you can utilize for the course.
Right. Yeah, it's we always just say don't get bogged down in it. If you spend the whole length of the class building a perfect blade of grass, then you've missed the point. So make sure you get the flow of the course, because that's the workflow and the structure of it is very intentional. We won't stop you from making an asset. We don't require you to make an asset. I hope that answered the question. It's a good question. Yeah, and somebody's saying that the games industry encourages you to specialize in the film industry too, in visual effects, but in virtual production, it's and even in some places in film too. That there's some cool articles recently. I saw one, somebody at ILM talking about the rise of the generalist, and I think that is fair to say. Whilst I always, for myself in my own career, liked to say that I'm a generalist with a couple specialisms. As a way of getting really good at some subset of that, but be able to do as much as possible just makes you a very, very in demand. And if you're in demand, you can demand things yourself. So good
especially
place
with
to be.
things being a little easier nowadays. There's a lot more programs that I can now be a little bit more of a effects artist with EmberGen. I can just jump into that and start to mess around with stuff. Whereas like years ago, I wouldn't have even touched whatever programs were around for effects other than Maya's, whatever it was. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more ease to like having your fingers in kind of everything.
Yeah. I am happy about the rise of the generalist, because I am a generalist as well. But I like you said, I think it is good to know a bit of everything, but also like push yourself to be particularly good at a few things. Like for me, it's texturing and lighting. That's always been my favorite things, so that's what I focus on. But still, if I need to model something, sculpt something, if I need to make a tree, whatever it is, like I could still do it.
Yeah. So another question here saying, could someone expect, based on their progress in the course, to be qualified for a junior position at a studio upon completion? Would that be something like the third floor, digital domain, etc.? So that there any success stories to that effect? Certainly have lots of graduates go on and do really cool things. Go work at ILM, go work at Digital Domain, all of the top studios. The course is designed for, as Safari said, associate level to help somebody get in at that level, but there's no reason why, if you're got a little bit more that you're building on top of, that you could expect to advance quickly, or maybe even jump in a little higher than that. But you should, based on this, be able to be productive in a role in the industry. Yes.
Yep.
I'm going to jump in, see how many more of these we can answer. So what skills from traditional art department would you say translate to working in the VAD? How how to apply experience from traditional art department to the VAD. And will the course touch on how the departments work together? Yes, to that one, for sure. We definitely touch on how art department and virtual art department work together, and we're always trying to get those two things closer together or even be the same thing. But applying skills from the art department, I would say, yeah, you already, the eye is the biggest thing. You can learn a tool in a day, but really culturing your eye and your sensibility and your workflow and how to operate in that world with those people, and it's all of the things that from the art department are relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the building of these things, like even taking assets that are already created and laying them out in a scene, and then learning how to light those scenes. That's enough of new skills to learn that's associated with the VAD, that you're using the layout skills from traditional art department, not knowing what part of the traditional art department is being mentioned, but assuming that it's like set design or maybe like even construction, translating that and knowing that you these things are, that perspective of building these sets, and or an art director kind of gathering the reference and knowing how to like photo bash, and then that, like Ed was saying, that eye of putting this stuff together. It's not like you have to really know how to do ZBrush if you don't know it already, and even building out basic geometry and finding that online, and then being able to lay it out and light it so that it's, I think, yeah, it's a, because they match, they use different programs, but it's even the Revit, certain programs like CAD, that stuff can be imported into Unreal through Datasmith. Is that right?
Yep.
Is it the program? Because even concept artists on Black Adam, they didn't want to touch Unreal for a bit, and then they started getting into it, where we sent them the project set up so that it's set up with VR, and they're able to from 3ds Max or some other program, take that stuff and import it with their textures, and then with a simple light setup, then the director, DP, and production designer, now then we can facilitate that review process of just like you guys are in there now. Scope it out real quick, and if you like it, we can import it into our our VAD project, our main VAD projects, where we can like clean it up and light it a little bit better, like bake it down. But yeah, absolutely, that translation, that whole like translation from art department to VAD, it will get much blurrier, or the lines between them will get a lot blurrier.
Hopefully.
Yeah. That's the aim.
Good. Yeah, good question. Someone else is asking, is the course all exterior environment stuff, or do you all get into interiors? Yes, interiors.
Yeah, it's I believe it's ultimately the concept in which you want to build. We ultimately want to make sure that the project that you guys are being built is something you guys enjoy and you're going to have fun with. So ultimately, it becomes what it is that you want to build, and then we help guide you along the path within building those.
There's no discrimination against interiors.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I prefer interiors, actually.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Every project, if it has a cave, I'm on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a big opening.
Like, yeah, at least an interior with a giant door, or maybe not. With different types of cave. Anyway, semantics. You mentioned the importance of clear cross-departmental communication. Do you work with your clients to establish a clear vocabulary to improve the feedback loop? Yes, for sure. There's different worlds, different languages, different experience, fear about new techniques, and the beginning of Lion King was like lots of games, visual effects production, all these different worlds colliding with different culture and different language, and it was you're in the real-time engine, you're talking about an area light, and we're like the gaffer's saying, what on earth is that? And you're trying to get on the same page as far as that goes. Yeah.
I've heard so many terminologies for lights, like scallop lights, key lights, for like blinders. There's so many different terminologies. So yeah, so trying to sometimes all you can do is just interpret what they mean when they say, "Can you give me a scallop over here?" And you're like, "Yeah, let's put a light over here and hope it works." So sometimes it's interpretation, but oftentimes it's finding a sort of you sort of vocabulary. There's also certain vocabulary within virtual production that you know people takes a little bit to get accustomed to, but just part of the process.
Even scout,
Yeah,
it's a little. A scout's a certain thing to go on location and scout a place to see if it's even a viable location. And how we were describing our main location scouts with Favreau and the whole team, we call it a scout, but really it's just like a review. And like that terminology, they knew from the beginning it's whatever. So they weren't really confused on it. And it kind of was in the since the first season vernacular. But it's definitely something like even working in the UK versus the US, certain terms will be slightly different. Generally, it's the same in filmmaking, but it's always needing to go through. We go through like a training exercise of like, or I guess like a introductory presentation type thing where we are training on the process generally, and then just like making sure those terms are written out and clearly defined, and like here's what we mean by this. Even using so like blockout or grayscale, it's like white card. If it makes sense, like to really connect those dots.
Yep.
Somebody's asking, is it necessary to have experience with ZBrush, Maya, Blender, etc., in order to get into virtual production at any level, or is Unreal sufficient as a standalone?
I'd say again, like you tools like ZBrush, maybe you don't have to learn it, but you should know at least one modeling software, regardless of what it is: Blender, 3ds Max, Maya. Whichever one works for you is the one that's going to work in development. Outside of a modeling tool, it really becomes kind of what you want to learn. Again, the more you learn, the more value you're going to ultimately bring to a project, right? Ultimately, production is going to want to have someone that knows as much as they possibly can, so that they could utilize them as much as they possibly can. So if you know ZBrush, 3ds Max or whatever, Substance Painter and all those things, then now all of a sudden you can now you know how to model, you know how to sculpt, you know how to texture, you know how to make trees or cloth, whatever it might be. So they do add value. Now, do you have to? No, like you might you might get by, but I'm not sure.
It depends on the amount, the amount that you are. How do I word this? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sculpt well and model well with like perfect edge loops and everything else, but getting the rough shape typically is enough, especially for the VAD. When it gets to like projecting on the LED screens, it tends to get into, depending on where it is in the scene, maybe it needs to go into another round of a professional, like expert modeler. But really, the texturing is it's one of the biggest things in these scenes to to overcome. Knowing how to photo project on even a simple model, that would build a scene really quickly in a way that's, it would trick the eye if done right, and it would trick the eye to believe that it's something, that quality is higher than it is. If you were to go into grayscale or detailed lighting or lighting only in Unreal, and you see that it's gray and everything's super bubbly and blocky, but you turn on texturing, and if, as long as the lighting isn't like scrapey lighting, maybe it's overcast, maybe it's hidden a little bit, but the texturing is the main thing that really becomes obvious that it's not quite hitting it. The modeling can kind of fall short.
Yeah, it's to add on that, it's often the case that the when you think about a room, for example, right? A room is just a series of cubes and rectangles. It's just blocks. You go into your kitchen, you might have a beveled countertop if you're fancy, but like you're basically just cubes. So when you're doing a lot of these scenes, even like exterior scenes, um, what you end up working with essentially are nice looking cubes. It's different if you're doing, like a cave or some super organic rocky thing. Then yeah, like, there's some sculpted shapes. But when you get handed a scene, like a Book of Boba Fett, when it's the garage scene, and it's like, how do we make a garage literally just four walls and a ceiling? How do we make that look photo real? And you could try to sculpt it and do all that, but at the end of the day, it's a flat wall. How do you make it look photo real? And so, to Safari's point, and that was one of the things that I textured, actually, was that wall. A little pat on the back right there, but but yeah, so it becomes about the textures. So even though we're getting questions about modeling, yeah, the biggest thing becomes like, if you can take a simple scene and make it look great because of textures, like, yeah, you'll win that race.
I asked one of my first mentors. People keep talking about photorealism. How do you do that? It was like a real kind of beginning of a career type of question to ask. But I was interested genuinely what his answer would be, and the he said, start with photography. If you if you ground everything in photography, then it's going to look more photoreal. If you use photographic reference, if you use photographic texturing, and nowadays photographic modeling techniques, you end up with something that's photoreal. And yeah, absolutely, textures are everything,
Yeah,
almost.
The proof is in the name, right? Photo real. It's like, yeah,
Right.
pictures. We need pictures.
Yeah, exactly. Not to say that it's easy, but yeah.
No,
it's simple to describe.
Yeah, it's simple, but it's not easy. The difference. Simple concept.
Yeah. Somebody here is asking, I'm currently in Unreal for filmmakers, and which is another class that we have, was interested in the world building course, and was wondering if you believe it would be a good next step for someone brand new to visual effects in the other course. And then the question trailed off. But yeah, I mean, it really depends on what you want to get into. It's an amazing course if you want to get into world building. If you really, I always say, for like a next class or even a first class, if you're really into it, if you're excited by the idea and it lights you up, then yeah, definitely, because this will definitely help. You gotta feel it. You gotta like making worlds. I've liked making worlds since Populous in whenever that was in the 80s, and cardboard boxes. So I've proved that to myself a long time ago. But if you enjoy it, if you feel that spark, if you care about it, if you want to keep doing it even when the end of the day comes, if you wake up thinking about it, those kinds of things. Yeah. There'll be days where you don't feel that enthusiastic about it sometimes, but yeah, if you got that passion, it will draw you through. It's a great thing to do. I love making worlds. Somebody else saying, I have been hearing more about nerfs for 3D. How does that affect? What did you say, Safari?
I said yes.
Yes. Good answer. There you have it.
Have you dived too much into it?
A little bit. Yeah, I was playing with that. I've forgotten the name of it now. There's a plugin for Unreal that loads nerfs. Anyway, yeah.
I can't wait. It's such an exciting tech. And then I saw something that was FEGR, I think, where it's with Nerf, you still have the baked-in lighting, but this other one, supposedly, it helps with delighting and is able to relight. But even that progression of like photogrammetry can only do so much, and that idea of that extra bit of reflectivity and the right amount of light bouncing off of a white wall or a bright wall.
Yep.
That kind of stuff is so exciting because that's exactly what's missing from these kind of scenes. Those photogrammetry or even just like 360 sets. It's like obviously it's flat, but once it starts getting into you can just take a video or like now you have a real environment in that scene. Like I don't know how it's gonna translate and propagate to the virtual production, but I'm guessing it's gonna get there pretty quick.
It's coming.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a crazy LiDAR. When I was working for an autonomous electric race car championship, I found out about this LiDAR that had a spectroscopy sense to it. So like you can find out what's in stars using the same technology. You basically measure the light coming back from them, and you can figure out what elements they're built of, and therefore you can figure out the all sorts of things about them, including all the components, the elemental components of a star. And they've figured out this LiDAR for cars where you can do the same thing. You can shoot out lasers and figure out what it's hit, not just the color or the depth, but also the material properties. So you can work out whether it's reflective or not, and what it's made of. You can figure, and they're using it to try and find like ice and wet patches on the road. But you can effectively say, oh, this is concrete, this is metal, for doing nerdy kind of autonomous car stuff. But I'm sure as that gets into the film world, it's going to be, rebuilding materials, PBRs out of lasers.
Oh my god, I can't wait. Then we can do that with our phone eventually.
Probably, yeah. LiDARs are creeping onto phones.
That's right.
Crazy times. Let's see if we got another couple here. I don't want to keep us going all night, but there's a bunch of folks still on. So thank you for staying with us.
If anybody else doesn't know what NERF is and they want to look it up, it's neural radiance fields, right?
Yep. I forget what the E stands for.
I think it's just a continuation of neural.
Somebody Google it and type it in the chat for extra points. Am I actually Googling on the live webinar? No, I'm not going to do that. Somebody look it up. Comment in the chat. Somebody asked, how do you guess scale or ratio of landscape with human size? Like, I guess there's a general scale question.
If you're talking about landscapes specifically, within the tool, you can kind of the landscape, like Gaia, whatever, you can basically like get measurements for the most part as far as like kilometers and all that stuff. Generally speaking, in regards to scale, the larger something is, it doesn't have to be like as super precise in a sense. Like if you're doing a 60 by 60 kilometer landscape in virtual production, which I don't recommend you do, but if you do a landscape that big for virtual production, I doubt you're going to have a production designer saying, is this 58 kilometers? Like the two, you're pinching pennies at that point. So as far as landscapes, there's various ways within the actual like landscape tools that you can sort of grasp how big it is and measure it. If you're pulling like satellite data, then it's really easy because it kind of gives you the measurement based on the sort of area you're selecting. Um, and then everything else, things like walls, bevels, pillars, urns, things like that. Oftentimes, like if you're modeling something, there's measuring tools within the modeling tools, like 3ds Max, for example. There's sort of measuring tools within there that you can use. Also, if you're using something as reference, and if they're like, hey, here's a picture of an urn, copy it. I mean, if you copy the image, it's probably going to be about the same size. So, um, but I don't know if anyone else wants to expand on that.
I always like measuring things with a cube in Unreal because
Yeah.
it comes in as 1 meter, and if you scale it in any axis, then numerically it tells you how far it is. It's annoying that you only get that middle click in orthographic view,
Mhm.
but good old cube, like cubes. Put
Yep.
people in there that are 6 foot tall.
Yeah.
Somebody's commented in there, yes, neural radiance fields. We got it right.
Nice.
I googled it and it came back as non-expanding recreational foam, but I think that's the other. That's the
That's
other
also
nerf.
fun.
Yeah. Do we have any more? I don't know if we have any more questions. We've gone 40 minutes over on this webinar. I think. Oh, somebody. Let's take this one last one. So, someone's saying, can you take a moment to talk about the opportunities in virtual production? Are you still having issues finding people? I know it's early days still, but what's the job market like out there these days? Interesting question.
Yeah, it's great because we looked for people who had great skills in the world building and environment art side. It may not have been very interested in film or virtual production. Not that it wavered their skills, but in like for some reason in like some of the people that were getting like from games and video games, they may not have been so pumped to work on a film or like in this like aspect of it. Uh, whereas like their focus had always been like game specific, but maybe it's like the introduction of visual effects artists are trying to get into real time, which are coming from film, and it's kind of like the kind of knowing what the passion of knowing of watching a lot of film and being in that industry. Maybe it's you're they're kind of looking towards what the final product would be. That's that's more geared towards like this filmic thing. Not to say that game artists are or don't hit that quality, but it's like the interest maybe, and it's
I yeah, I think so. I think it's not so much is it hard to find good artists because I mean you go on ArtStation and you see a laundry list of good looking art pieces. It's finding the right artist, which can be the difficult thing. And I think part of that comes from because virtual production is so new, the people that are currently getting pulled into it are either game developers or game artists or visual effects artists, and they're not virtual production artists. In fact, if you tell someone I'm a virtual production artist, trust me, they'll ask you what is that, because it's so new. It's like what does that mean to be a virtual production artist? Does that mean you make game, like where do you fit? And that's because it's still a new facet within the production pipeline. And so yeah, so oftentimes it's people from games, visual effects getting pulled in, and it kind of becomes the people that have a passion for it end up staying, and those are the people that work out. But that's why, yeah, and then and then the kind of irony to that is we're seeing more and more of these studios pop up, and which means they're pulling even more game artists and visual effects artists into virtual production, but they're not necessarily, or at least not all the time, pulling virtual production artists into their virtual production companies. And there is a clear distinction between, building a level for a game and building a set for virtual production. And there's terminologies to know, there's workflows, there's also learn, there,
Culture.
yeah, there's a lot more that goes into it. But yeah, so I think that's the biggest thing, and that's why something like this becomes very helpful, because instead of being a game artist trying to get into virtual production, you're a virtual production artist trying to get into virtual production. So it's putting a square peg in a square hole finally.
Right. Yeah, it was interesting watching that on Lion King, the cultural differences interacting of games, production, and visual effects. Very different. Very, very, very different. And not everybody who jumped in liked it. Some people loved it so much they left their whole industry based on that one experience. But yeah, it's very fun if you're into it.
Yep.
We got somebody sneaked another question in here. We'll take this as the last one. Definitely the last one. If I wanted to build a team that could work between 3ds Max and Unreal, what are the best skills for me to be looking for? That's an interesting question as well. I mean, Datasmith will definitely take layout between those two programs.
Mm-hmm.
That's skills-wise. It's like the same things we've been talking about, really.
Yeah, kind of like the being able to have artists that are working in 3ds Max, and then to be able to bring that stuff into Unreal, right? What are the best skills for that?
So again, and I again, this is where something like teaching virtual production becomes important, because ultimately what you want is a virtual production artist for your virtual production. And what I mean by that is someone that knows how to make game assets look good enough for film, and that sort of understands the different roles within film. So, for example, if you're talking to someone and they're like, I do games, you might want to ask them, what's your favorite movie? And maybe ask them about, depending on how deep you want to get into it, but basically seeing someone's film knowledge, but having like a game background, at least for now, as we're still pulling game artists and visual effects artists, that might be one aspect of going, is seeing how adept someone from games is in films, and then vice versa. If you're talking to someone from film, seeing how adept they are at games, as far as the necessary tools and workflows in developing it. And, and just trying to find people that sort of fit somewhere in between. Because at the end of the day, that's essentially kind of, to put it very simply, that's kind of what a virtual production artist is kind of like a perfect balance between a game artist and a visual effects artist, a filmmaker in a way. But yeah, that's kind of how I would sum that up.
Yeah. Understanding the bits of each one. And and it's funny how they each in those industries is influenced the other, and sending things back the other way as well, like film kind of principles or knowledge back into the games industry, or bringing things from games into film, like the interaction and the building worlds that because we're still dressing to camera. Essentially, we're not building every direction everywhere in 150 square kilometers to make it look like you could. Not yet, anyway. We'll see with the procedural content generation. Maybe we can start doing that, but yeah, it's the whole procedural side of things. I think it's going to make it really, really interesting in both communities, in the games and film.
Yeah,
communities.
right. Yeah. Even Dallas was talking about he was showing the blockout stage, and you want to do that first and get like the general thing, so you don't start moving your big assets, or you jump into like the detail and start moving your big assets when you have your small assets. But with that technique, it's like, okay, you can start building that out, and then move your big assets, or like plop in something else that's new, and then it just like, boop, there you go.
Oh yeah, I was playing around with it, and if it's, if let's say you're in a meeting and they're like, I kind of want some cliffs over there, you could have already set up a procedural tool, and you're like, yeah, sure, and you just draw a spline, and then it's like, boop, 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 cliffs, or hey, I think we need a river that running through here, and it's like, okay, and then everything just moves around it. Like, yeah, it's that procedural stuff is gonna, it's once once 5.2 is stable, it's gonna really, I think it's gonna be kind of a next leap in developing sets in virtual production.
Well, gentlemen, it has been a fantastic evening. Thank you guys so much for spending so much time with us, answering everybody's questions. We've got through hopefully most people's. I like someone said, "Is this live?" Yes, it is. So that proves it, right? But yeah, thank you both so much for being a part of this. I really appreciate it. It's been really enjoyable. It feels like there's probably another 5 webinars that we could do out of this. There's probably questions we didn't get to. It's a big topic, and yeah, I appreciate you bringing your time of an evening and your wisdom.
I really appreciate it, Ed. Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. This has been great.
You bet. Yeah, thank you guys. And thanks also to our great question asking audience out there. You guys have kept us honest, and you've asked great questions, and thank you all for making it what it was as well. And yeah, we look forward to working with you guys if anybody wants to join us in the class. But either way, keep in touch, and we'd love to hear your opinions on anything that we've gone through tonight, anything that we can help with, and wish you all a very wonderful evening, and we'll see you again soon.
Yep.
Thanks so much.
Good night, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Good night.